It is the 5th of September, 2023. I sit in a poorly lit, low-ceilinged room, surrounded by screaming babies and frown lines on tired faces. I am slowly coming to realize that Montreal Pierre Elliott Trudeau Airport's immigration waiting room might in fact be the worst place on earth to absorb the shockwaves of a breakup 10 hours fresh. The computers are broken, so I sit there for 4.5 hours, clutching my knees and choking back tears. Nobody bothers me. Eventually, with damp cheeks and a piece of paper declaring me a student and resident of Quebec, I drift into my new life. In the city, I stare down at Saint Laurent Boulevard from my new bedroom above a dive bar. But all I see are grimy surfaces and steel pipes and drunks shouting at each other. And I try to remember why I would leave behind a perfectly good life for a city that is uglier than I remember, brimming with people I do not know. In the months that follow, I go on unnecessarily long walks. I drink myself into stupor and hook up with strangers. I pierce my septum, I dye my hair red, then purple, then black, then red again, but none of it makes me feel like a new person. I watch self-help TikToks and write letters in my notes app to the man I thought I'd marry, but they never reach him. I try to slip his name into every conversation I possibly can, and I fantasize about fatal accidents, him hearing news of my death and regretting everything. I realize that I have forgotten how to be a person outside of being someone's person, and I revel in this misery, in the solipsistic certainty that nobody has or will ever understand a heartbreak like mine. And eventually the tears start to dry out and I feel mostly exhausted, which is good because friends who are only kind of friends seem tired of hearing about my inconsolable despondency. When Christmas rolls around, I pay a budget airline $60 to fly home 2 weeks earlier than planned. My hair has turned brittle and grey from the barrage of box dye. And when friends ask me how I am, how is your new life, I don't know what to say. My parents are worried and anxiously tell me that I don't have to go back if I don't want to. I think back to 2 years ago, when on a student exchange and even in the midst of a global pandemic, I somehow find a part of myself in this city. When, despite homesickness and panic, I can't help but feel curious about a place so full of life. I find the snow romantic, and I shriek the first time I see a yellow school bus. I notice Leonard Cohen's face grinning at me from seemingly everywhere. And I stop every time I see a string of small children waddling down the street, a train of tiny faces peeking out of tiny snowsuits, gently tugged by a tired-looking teacher. I seem to be perpetually accosted by eccentric old men who tell me anecdotes about my hometown. But I don't mind because my voice kindles time travel, glazed eyes in blissful reminiscence of distant glory days. So I return to this city, nervous, apprehensive, and something strange happens. I start to see Leonard Cohen's face grinning at me, and strings of children and yellow school buses. Then one day, I'm eating a pastry, sitting on a bench in a small corner of delicious sunshine, and I feel fine. Not good or bad, just fine. But I ring my sister to tell her this news because I cannot remember the last time I felt something so nondescript, so inoffensive, a neutral nothing eye of the storm. With all the swiftness of a burning wick or drying paint, I start to find fragments of myself in this city, strewn around like wayward jigsaw pieces. I realize that in the process of convincing myself that I'm alone in this world, I seem to have forgotten how many other versions of love exist out there. On streets and dance floors, in cafes and supermarket aisles and bars and kitchens of friends new and old. I dance until morning in rooms full of strangers, and I cycle through the city with music in my ears. I ring my parents to trade unremarkable stories of the everyday, and I sit in coffee shops with only characters from books for company. I even start dating again, tentatively and more so in the pursuit of entertainment than companionship. So it is okay when I meet people who tell me they are starting a cult, or ghost me, or forget to ask me a single question over the course of a 3-hour date. One day, a slightly tipsy new friend asks me the name of my ex, and I realize I can't remember the last time I slipped his name into conversation. I cut a tiny fringe, which I'm pretty sure he would have hated, and my mother insists makes me look like Robin Hood's Friar Tuck, but I don't mind, because this time I kind of do feel like a new person. It is the 28th of September, 2025. I have been back in this city for approximately 3 weeks. I have already crossed the street to avoid someone. I have a new visa. I have cut my hair again. I have already cried and laughed and soaked up the dregs of the watery summer sunshine. 5 days ago, a man on an e-bike mows me down on Avenue Duluth. An old lady drags me back to the pavement, and we exchange broken words of English and French. She tells me her name is Carol, and I tell her that is the name of my late grandmother. 3 days later, I meet a middle-aged man with an English accent in an auditorium, and he tells me his name is David, and I tell him my dad's name is David. I do not believe in signs, but when an old lady called Carol picks me up off the street, and a man with the same name and voice as my dad tells me we support the same football team 3,000 miles away, I can't help but feel like that means something. I climb to the Belvedere lookout point on Mount Royal. It is nearly 4 years since I first set foot in this city I can't seem to stop returning to. It is 2 since I cried in the Montreal Pierre Elliott Trudeau Airport's immigration waiting room. I had my wisdom teeth removed a week ago. I have not smoked a cigarette in a week. It has felt like a very long week. And those 2 teeth that were once a part of me sit on my desk, collecting dust. When I reach the top of the mountain, I sit on a step, watch the sun sink below the skyline, feel the nicotine seep into my bloodstream, and feel completely whole. And it's kind of funny because for a brief moment there, I thought I was living through the end of the world. And as I watched the light dance across the tiny buildings below me, all I have to show for it is some faded scarring and bruises left behind by a high-speed e-bike. Thank you.